Lastly, Sandrone's Elemental Burst. And as you can see, it can do a lot of damage. Yes, what's up guys, and today is another big day because we finally get to play and showcase Sandrone. And I'm sure you've seen the teasers by now. Sandrone is the new DPS releasing just before Snezhnaya, designed specifically around the superconduct reaction. She fires a lot of lasers, and you might have noticed some of the characters in my team here coming with Sandrone, a bunch of buffed old characters like Yae Miko, Qiqi, Beidou, Diona, Risley, Sino, and these characters are also getting revamped kits to build around superconduct. Well, technically, these teams use a special type of superconduct called stellar conduct, which at the moment is activated if your team has Sandrone. It's best to think of it like Nilou releasing with her bountiful blooms and enhancing that reaction. I think this is of course exciting because aside from, let's say, Eula, who released back in 1.5, we've basically gone 5 years without a focus on superconduct. It's been a pretty ignored archetype until this point. So before we get into our kit, both you and I have to understand the stellar conduct reaction because it does affect how you really want to play Sandrone and build her teams. So like I said, stellar conduct currently requires Sandrone in your team, similar to the lunar reactions requiring Inefa, Lauma. Otherwise, I can remove Sandrone from this team, and even though we have a bunch of buffed characters here, they will just trigger the basic superconduct. It is unknown at this time whether we'll get more characters that can enable superconduct like Sandrone, but I have to assume that will be the case, because at the moment, Risley and Sino also receive stellar conduct buffs, but they're main DPSs, and you can't exactly play Sino or Risley as a main DPS because Sandrone is also a DPS. So it would make sense to have a stellar conduct support released at some point, probably very soon. So this is the standard superconduct. All it does is it does a bit of reaction damage, AoE cryo damage specifically, and it also reduces the enemy's physical res by 40% for 12 seconds, which is why it was only ever really played to boost your physical teams. Now this is stellar conduct. And you see that damage there with the font, similar to the Nod Cryo teams. So once your team activates the stellar conduct reaction, a Polestar field is generated around you. It looks like a Primogem just underneath the boss, and it has a range. And within this zone, the cryo attacks and electro attacks from your team accumulate stellar conduct stacks. So let me just stand around on Yae Miko. The stellar conduct, what is it doing? 93k hits. 93.8k hits. Now it's 103k. $109k if I spam a bunch of normal attacks. So what are these? 115k. So you might be wondering what these stacks are doing. They're clearly increasing my damage. You can think of it a bit like the Ocean Hued Clam set, if you ever used that on Kokomi or a different character. The artifact set's bubble stores your character's healing and it explodes every about 3.5 seconds. Except stellar conduct doesn't deal damage directly. The stacks that this reaction stores just buffs your character's damage, including their own direct stellar damage. The reaction is also similar to the default superconduct by debuffing enemies to reduce their physical res, but it also gives cryo and electro damage bonus to your team, which increases on your stacks. And importantly, the zone activates Sandrone's stellar conduct kit, as well as a lot of the buffed characters getting new mechanics in their kit, which enhance them after activating the field. Now, here's the cool thing. The cryo and electro stacking mechanic means that you want to make sure your team has a lot of cryo and electro hits. And that means it gives off-fielders like Yae Miko and Qiqi and Diona, gives them even more value. You could think of it like a Nilou Bloom team. How in those Nilou teams, you want to stack a bunch of Hydro and Dendro applicators. This is kind of similar. The more Cryo and Electro hits your team has, it increases your reaction damage. It gives damage bonus to their non-reaction hits, which also means it does de-incentivize you from playing Sandrone with a lot of attack or EM buffers that aren't adding a lot of elemental hits. Maybe a team-wide attack buffer like Nicole, who can still be good, just like someone like Sucrose can still be good, but them not providing Cryo and Electro hits is negating a lot of what they bring to the table. But we'll get into the team recommendations later. Now that we've understood Stellar Conduct, how do you play Sandrone? I would say her kit is very simple. Maybe it'll get complicated in the future when someone figures out some crazy stuff, but at least for now, at least on day one, it is very straightforward. I'm sure you guys remember Neuvillette. You use his skill or his burst to generate these droplets, and then you do his charge attack beam. Sandrone is kind of similar. Her damage is primarily through her charge attack beam as well. And she also has some nice burst damage whenever you have that energy up. Mechanically, she's kind of similar to Neuvillette or Nefa in the sense that you can just keep your charge attack held down and you'll keep attacking. And you can even keep it held down as you press her skill. The bulk of this damage is direct Stellar Conduct damage. The charge attack doesn't go on forever, just like with Neuvillette. So you'll see after 3 hits, it actually goes red and overloads. And how do you clear her bar? With her elemental skill. So presses a skill and then it resets again. The elemental skill itself, it glides and it does its own Stellar Conduct damage and allows you to continually deal charge attack damage. And the skill also buffs the next charge attacks via her Ascension talent. It's worth knowing, unlike Neuvillette, her skill has a very short cooldown, which basically means you can just keep chaining her charge attack and skill. It's the perfect length for 3 charge attacks, and it's not hard to do. And that's basically her attack combo, honestly. Set up with your team, activate your Stellar Conduct and your team's buffs, use lasers with Sandrone, use her skill in between, and you can also use your ultimate if you have that. And you just go and rinse and repeat until you need to reactivate your team's abilities and their buffs. Lastly, Sandrone's elemental burst. And as you can see, it can do a lot of damage. It's a very simple but huge AoE laser attack. And its damage dealt is a massive amount of Stellar Conduct damage, as long as you've activated the Polestar field, which should always be on. But it's also important to note, her skill also buffs the damage dealt by your burst. After your charge attack is overloaded and then you use your skill, you'll get 10 of these improved tactic stacks, which basically increases your burst by 200%. So if I set up on my team again, and I press her burst straight away, 260k. If I do 3 charge attacks and then the burst, 400k, maybe 390 there. But like I said, what you're supposed to do your 3 charge attacks, then the skill, then you press the burst. 761k there. So all that to say, Sandrone's rotation is extremely flexible and you can use the burst at any point. Like, I can save my burst. Let me do these attacks here. And then I can use it to just finish enemies off. Whatever you want. The TLDR on Sandrone is use your 3 charge attacks. Then when you hit the overload, press your skill and repeat. And then you can either keep doing charge attacks or you can press her burst. Whatever you want. Be very flexible depending on the situation. You can even do some charge attacks, to be honest. Use her skill, swap your characters to reset, reapply some buffs, reapply some Stellar Conduct, and come back. She's extremely flexible. And it helps that a lot of these teammates like Yae Miko, Qiqi, maybe Escoffier, all these characters are extremely rotationally flexible. Just make sure your team has your buffs up and you can play however you want. So let's talk about getting complicated. So since Sandrone's playstyle looks and feels a lot like Nivelet's, the first thing I was wondering is, can I find an animation cancel for her to speed up these beams like you can with Nivelet? Like, you know, Nivelet has a thing where you let go of his charge attack early and it comes out way faster than if you just hold his left click. See, look how slow that is. Compare that to as fast as that. And the results may surprise you, but I actually found just holding your mouse click down, keeping it held down, and then just tapping skill after your 3 charge attacks to be faster than maybe you don't know that, and then you let go of your charge attack each time you press your skill or something like that. This is slower than just keeping it held. And on top of that, I was trying to figure out if there were any dash cancels you could do. So maybe something gets discovered by someone in the future. By the way, her skill is also very cool in the overworld. Look at this, it's quite decent for movement, but also, believe it or not, you can fly with this. So it's like a mini Chaska, a mini Wanderer kind of thing. Sandrone also has 2 more buffing talents, the Ascension 2 giving her 8 EM for every 100 attack, which caps out at 160 EM, so 2k total attack. It's not huge, but considering Stellar Conduct does scale with EM, this is quite nice to have. And her last passive talent is what converts your party's Superconduct into Stellar Conduct. And then similar to how all the Lunar characters can increase your Lunar base reaction damage by 14%, Sandrone also gets that for Stellar Conduct 14% every 100 attack, which basically means, yeah, 2k attack is what you want to do to cap out all these passives. So how do you build Sandrone? Well, this Superconduct set that you've been farming for finally has a use. It gives her basically all the stats she wants: attack, Stellar Conduct reaction damage, crit rate as well. I believe it's actually been updated for this patch to include this extra bonus here for Stellar Conduct. And yeah, as you might have guessed from this crit rate, it's important to know that Stellar Conduct does benefit from crit. And as I said, it does also benefit from EM. And her burst is extremely powerful, so she also benefits from ER. This makes Sandrone nice to build because she scales off of crit rate, crit damage, EM, attack, energy recharge. However, just like the Lunar reactions in Nod Cry, Stellar Conduct doesn't care about damage bonus. So you're not going to want a cryo damage bonus goblet, you're going to want an attack goblet. If you haven't managed to farm the Superconduct set Deep Shadow just yet, I suppose the best temporary set you could use is Gilded Dreams. But just bear in mind the Superconduct set is significantly better than this, about 15%. Being that much better than the second best set, at that point, your Sandrone just doesn't even have a set if you're not using this signature set. Like I said, for main stats, you're going to want an attack sands, attack goblet, and a crit damage circlet most likely. You almost certainly want a crit damage circlet due to Sandrone getting plenty of crit rate from the artifact set. On top of that, you're going to get cryo res. So just off the cryo res and the artifact set, your Sandrone will be at 100% crit if you have around 70. So that's what you want to aim for. And attack should be prioritized over EM. That's why you're probably going to want to do attack sands, attack goblet, and then crit, rather than EM. But if you do have a very good EM piece instead of attack, it can work fine. EM's not that much worse than attack. So the next thing you want to know is, does Sandrone prefer attack buffs or EM buffs? So we can test that with my Beidou right now. So Beidou with Noblesse. She's doing, what was that, 130k? And then let me give Beidou a random instructor set here. And activate the instructor buffs. So just forget the part about instructor reducing your character's damage, but just purely looking at buffs. If you've got Sandrone on the signature, you probably have your Yae Miko also on the same set. If you only got 2 buffing slots, then you're probably going to want some attack buffs. So like Tenacity on Qiqi, maybe a Noblesse set on Beidou. Sandrone is built pretty similarly to Flynn's or Enefa if you're familiar with them. They like crit, they like attack, they like EM as well, but they mostly like crit and attack. They don't want damage percent. Here's my build that I've managed to get so far. Like I said, this crit rate is basically 100. I've got her on the signature weapon, which we'll talk about. And then I've got a lot of crit, trying to also get a bit of attack and some energy recharge. I personally think this 144 might be a bit too high, but because you don't need that much crit, at a certain point, you're probably just focusing on crit damage, attack, and ER. So it's quite natural to get a decent amount of ER. I would say aim for about 120% ER if you can. Let's also talk about her weapons. The signature is obviously going to be the best weapon. It provides all the stats that she wants. It gives you a lot of crit damage, a lot of attack, and even stellar conduct damage bonus here. Alternative 5 stars, you're looking at Moika's signature. Dia's signature is also alright, as long as you don't waste all this crit rate, which you probably will. But if you don't, it's okay. Similar thing with Navia's signature. It's probably going to be a bit weaker than Moika's sig, but it also does give you crit and attack, which is nice. And also Ito's signature does give a lot of crit. But if I go ahead and I show you Moika's sig, which is basically her second best weapon. Look how much that dropped. 107k after it stacks. So I calculate Sandrone's signature to range from 15 to 20% better than her second best options, which could be Moika's signature or one of those other 5 stars, but it would be 30% stronger than the best 4-star options. Those best 4-star options being Tidal Shadow, as long as you play her with a healer, and also Mailed Flower, which gives her quite a decent amount of stats to Sandrone. So, as I talked about already, you must build Sandrone around a superconduct team. There's no way getting around it. Her multipliers are focused around stellar conduct anyway. Not only are Sandrone's main multipliers superconduct rather than raw damage, but stellar conduct itself scales just like Needle Bloom teams, where you want teammates that frequently deal Electro and Cryo off field. Now, that's not to say you need all 4 characters to be Electro and Cryo, but I would say at minimum 3. Ideally picking at least 2 of the buffed characters, especially because the buffed characters are really good. They've all been designed specifically for stellar conduct. So the first teammate you're going to want is an Electro off-fielder, otherwise you just won't get super conduct. 2 real options here being Yae Miko or Beidou. As we'll get into, both of them have been buffed heavily this patch to not only deal more damage than they used to, but now bringing massive buffs to Sandrone. For example, Beidou C6, it used to just give Electro res, but now it also reduces opponent's Cryo res, increasing your stellar conduct, but also 200 EM to your active character, which is a lot of EM to Sandrone. And not only that, she also got buffs to her elemental skill, which you can now force to get the maximum value from this, and it will also give you extra energy. This is what Beidou's skill used to look like, but now you can kind of force the maximum buff if you wait, and that also gives her a ton of energy, reducing her ER issues by quite a lot. Although I wouldn't say you want to always do this. Then we have Yae Miko, who has a lot more changes than Beidou had. She now deals extra raw damage, but also deals extra direct stellar conduct damage with her skill. Her skill has also gone from a 14-second duration to now a 24-second duration, along with more damage boosts and stellar conduct damage for her. And also her burst no longer destroys her skill. Very importantly, if you can get her C1, and she is available in the free constellation event, Beidou gives 200 EM to your active character. Yae Miko C1 will actually give your whole team 50% stellar conduct damage. So that sounds very good. I'm gonna go ahead and activate that, because if you're a Yae Miko player, you probably should be getting this. So ignoring their damage, whose buffs are actually stronger for Sandrone? So Beidou will have a buffing set and C6. Yae Miko won't have a buffing set because her sub DPS is more important, but I am getting that C1. So let's use Beidou first. 122k hits on Sandrone, up to 130k. Let's compare that versus C1 Yae Miko. 62k into 100k into 106k, which totally makes sense because Beidou reduces the cryo res and increases your EM for Sandrone. The main difference is though, Yae Miko adds significantly more sub DPS than Beidou, and her C1 buff is also for the whole team. I'm just basic attacking on Sandrone. Those 92k hits are from Yae Miko, 95k. On top of all this raw damage that's going on below. And to be fair, I am using Yae Miko on the signature. Beidou will be using Favonius Greatsword instead of Yae Miko's signature. But you'll see, even if I take off Yae Miko's signature, they definitely do not deal the same amount of sub DPS. So let me use this Beidou there, and then let me normal attack. What is that, like 8k hits? Which is not terrible, but it's basically non-existent. And like I said, that's because Yae Miko has all these extra multipliers added to her damage now. I didn't even show off her burst damage, but her burst is still very good now, especially because it doesn't consume her skill. But she's also not burst reliant, whereas Beidou, she's kind of turned into more of a buffer now. She did not get Stellar Conduct direct damage like Yae Miko did. Beidou's kit is pretty much all about getting her burst up and then getting these multipliers here. You can build her for damage, but I think building her to buff Sandrone and getting this burst up time would be much better. But Yae Miko is crazy. I guess you could think of her like the Durin or Inefa of Stellar Conduct teams. Although you do kind of need this C1 to give this massive team buff. Otherwise, she's more of a sub DPS. I think this C1 is a massive advantage Yae Miko will have in Sandrone teams. I'm honestly thinking about this like a buy one, get one free deal. As in, if you pull for Yae Miko on the upcoming rerun, which they've recently announced, you can basically immediately jump from not having Yae Miko at all to having a C1 Yae Miko. Otherwise, at this point, for example, with myself, I'm kind of running out of choices from this Constellation event. It's slim pickings at this point. If I have a Yae Miko or Sino who are getting buffed, it's an obvious pick. If you don't have either Yae Miko or Beidou, then you could use some Copium options like Raiden or Fischl. They'll still bring off-field Electro application and damage. Maybe you could also give them tenacity for some extra attack buffs, but that's all they're really doing. If you're gonna use the Copium option, make sure it's only temporary. Beidou's a 4-star. Actually, speaking of Fischl, I do want to talk about Fischl because if you play someone like Nicole who applies attack buffs, you do activate the Hexerite secret, right? And in theory, that would make it so if you are able to trigger an overload, Fischl will give an attack buff. But unfortunately, that's really Copium because the only real way to trigger an overload is to trigger on Nicole, maybe when you press her skill. But other than that, you're not going to get any overloads at all. So the uptime is going to be really bad if you can even get it off. And I mean, look at Fischl's damage. It's not really going to be much higher than Beidou's anyway. For the third slot, you're going to want some sustain. I would recommend either Qiqi or Diona. Qiqi received a ton of buffs, but it's cool that even her healing has received a big buff. And Diona, a bit like Beidou, unfortunately didn't really get that much buffs. But she did get this extra off-field sub DPS, which will help contribute towards Stellar Conduct hits. She's got a small HP buff and buffs your team's Stellar Conduct damage by a bit. That's on top of her already previously giving the massive 200 EM, which she already did. But there was never really teams where you could utilize this buff on Diona, maybe a few melt teams, but now Diona at C6 is actually providing quite a lot of stuff. Diona's new off-field hits will activate once every 3.5 seconds. They don't generate extra energy or give you a shield, but like I said, they're there to build the stacks. If you want to see what they look like, you can see those extra hits there that just come in a flurry. Like that, the 608. That's not to say you should be building your Diona for damage, but like I said, it will activate the Stellar Conduct stacks. If you think about it, Beidou and Diona are quite similar. They're both giving 200 EM, and then Beidou's giving Res Shred, Diona's giving 40% reaction damage. Qiqi, I don't even know if I can briefly talk about these buffs. I feel like it deserves its whole separate video. She was not very useful before, so as you can see, they had to just redo everything. But she's now an insane support for Stellar Conduct and Sandrone. They gave her higher uptime on all her stuff, reducing her cooldowns, which is massive. She also basically has Yae Miko C1 built into the kit with this 50% Stellar Conduct damage bonus here. They also added these coordinated attacks every 2.2 seconds, but these I don't believe are Stellar Conduct damage. So this is similar to Diona's change, where this is just adding extra hits for Qiqi and Diona just to help build up your zone stacks. And then the burst, on the other hand, as you can see, her burst does have a Stellar Conduct damage hit. And this scaling, I believe, can reach 500% at level 10, which is a massive amount. But will you build your Qiqi for damage with a damaging weapon, a damaging set, and a lot of crit to utilize that? Well, I guess we can take a look. So this is the build I'm using on my Qiqi right now. It's still buff focused, it's still support focused. I've got decent amount of crit, not that much. Let's see how much damage Qiqi can do. So those cryo hits, I guess, are not amazing, but the burst, 147k. But I guess for that you have to use Beidou before using Qiqi. But probably one of the biggest changes to Qiqi is she actually generates energy now. Before, she was similar to some old characters like Barbara and Noelle, who didn't actually generate energy on their skill. So now when you use her skill, look, you see 2 cryo particles, it's a miracle. You get 2 cryo particles there. Another 2 there. So every few hits, you're getting 2 cryo particles. It's a massive improvement, and honestly, it actually makes Qiqi a pretty solid battery for Sandrone and the whole team. On top of that, they also buffed her C1. It used to just only give you 2 energy per hit. Now Qiqi's getting an extra 6 energy, so I can even show you how crazy it is. So let me start from scratch. Qiqi skill. Look, I am getting a few fav procs, but look at that. It's so easy to use her burst if you get one or two Fab Pocs on your team. Maybe you get some Fav on Qiqi, maybe you get some Fav on your Beidou or your whatever 4 teammate. And I honestly think Qiqi could use her burst every rotation now. But wait, I don't want to stop there because no way none of you have Qiqi constellations. You probably have her C2, which now gives her extra attack. Her C4 got an increase just to give a bit of extra healing. And her C6 now gives like Shenhe-like quills. When your active character deals stellar conduct, it will consume 1 quill equal to 400% of Qiqi's attack. This should be very strong if you do have a C6 Qiqi. Me personally, I'm still at C5. And what's crazy is that those were the sustains. I should also say, as a sustain, I think Nicole is also very viable because her attack buffs can massively benefit Sandrone and Yae Miko. So at the moment, my Sandrone has about 2.9k attack, Yae Miko about 2.4k. Nicole's skill gives an extra 300 attack. Luckily, Sandrone is kind of backloaded. You'll get the extra 300 quite quickly. Yae Miko will still only get about 300. I guess if you do her E and you wait around a bit, maybe use her burst, you can get a bit of extra attack. But Nicole has 2 big downsides, I would say. Number 1, her signature set, Celestial Gift, is focused around giving your team damage bonus, which, as we talked about, Stellar Conduct doesn't scale with damage bonuses, so this is not very useful. And the other thing is Nicole being Pyro. She doesn't even have an off-field Pyro, but even if she did, she's not Cryo or Electro, so she won't be contributing to the Polestar field. And for the 4th slot, you have quite a few options. You'd either want to play another character we've already mentioned, like playing Yae Miko and Beidou together, or playing Diona and Qiqi together. Or you can actually consider Escoffier or Xilonen. Both of them will provide Res Shred. Xilonen obviously giving 36% Res Shred. But Escoffier, even if you're not playing her in a freeze team, you are playing her in a triple cryo team, so you're still getting 15% cryo res shred on top of her sub DPS, which can actually be decent even outside of a freeze team. Plus, unlike Xilonen, Escoffier's off-field cryo hits would also contribute to your stellar conduct stacks. If you want to see what kind of damage she would deal with like a golden troop set and her signature weapon, it's not going to be amazing, but it will add up. So let me use Escoffier's skill. 13k, 14k hits, which is not crazy, but it will add up. She's providing stacks for the Polestar field as well. And on top of that, honestly, you could give her the tenacity set. Probably what I would do, it would be less damage than Golden Troop, but it's the same reason why you'd want it on Qiqi. This attack buff for the whole team is probably more valuable if you have it. You could also play Sucrose, who will also have Cryo Red Shred. However, that's the issue. Whether you're playing Xilonen, Escoffier, Sucrose, all these characters have the issue where they're probably not giving you Electro Res Shred. And because someone like Yae Miko actually does very valuable damage in the Sandrone team, not being able to give Res Shred to all your team's damage like these characters probably do in their other popular teams is a big dent in their viability, but they still work. I do appreciate in a team like this the fact that Beidou C1 does give you a shield, because Sandrone doesn't have infinite interrupt resistance. So I can show you, if I don't have a shield attacking with Sandrone, that guy just staggered me and he'll probably keep staggering me. But if I do have Beidou's shield, can let me tank a few hits. So you don't have to play Beidou. I guess some people might also use Nicole or Diona. There's 3 shielding options that are all very good. How I would recommend building a team like this, I've already gone through my Sandrone build with the signature set. Yae Miko, I would also give her the super conduct set. Her sub DPS is very important. And if you don't have her signature, which also got buffed by the way to include stellar conduct damage, I think the reason why they buffed this is because it used to only give damage bonus, which doesn't really synergize with stellar conduct. I wish they did this for other signatures, but oh well. If you don't have that, Widsith is more than fine. Should be perfectly good. And just like Sandrone, you want to build Yae Miko for attack, and crit. She doesn't really want Electro damage anymore. Qiqi or Diona, you want to give them a buffing set. Give Qiqi Tenacity. If you're playing Diona, give her Instructor or Noblesse. And then Qiqi, honestly, if you're greedy, you can build some crit stats. But I would say still try and prioritize attack. I've got her on triple attack because that's what her healing and her damage scales off of. And I honestly don't think she needs that much ER. Like, I have 180 purely because I've got her on Fav Sword. If you have her on a pure attack weapon and only have 120 energy recharge, will she get her burst back with these new energy changes? So 120 ER Qiqi. This is the comeback of the century here. Let me set up with my team. What was we at? We was almost at full, and I didn't even finish Sandrone's rotation. Because Stygian Onslaught still exists, and you're gonna want a battery on your team, and honestly, also, there isn't that many offensive weapons you could even use on Qiqi. I still think Favonius Sword should be good. Like, what would you use? Jade Cutter? But anyway, the conclusion is you don't need that much energy recharge anymore, which is crazy to say. Although, yeah, you do want the C1 in order to be in that situation. Without the C1, I think you're missing out on quite a lot of free energy on Qiqi. Then your ER requirements might go a lot higher. But at least with the C1, she definitely doesn't have energy issues anymore. Now, I have talked about Sandrone's weapon. Although I don't want to focus much on big vertical investment, I do want to discuss her early investment. We've already talked about her weapon. How good is this C1? It basically halves the time until you overload on her charge attack, and also gives your whole team 30% extra stellar conduct damage. Now, as you might have noticed from her gameplay, she doesn't really have downtime on her skill, and her skill also has a decent amount of damage itself. So although the C1 effectively doubles your hits until you need to use her skill, and it will front load your damage, I guess, depending on your team's cooldowns, it may not really actually let you get more hits in. The second part is important. In fact, this reminds me of HSR and how Elation characters have their early Eidolons, which buff your team's elation. This team-wide stellar conduct buff, whilst it isn't going to be a straight 30% multiplier, because you've already got stellar damage increases like Sandrone's weapon, maybe you have Yae Miko, so you are decently saturated. But this constellation could scale better in the future if they release more stellar conduct teammates, which I've already talked about is highly likely, not just for Sandrone, but in order for Wriothesley and Sino to actually form coherent teams. Therefore, although I personally will be getting just C0R1 Sandrone myself, if you wanted to invest further, you could easily justify a C1R1 stopping point on Sandrone. Although, as always, just remember you're playing with speculative future impact. Don't blame me if you end up regretting it. So what are Sandrone's biggest strengths? She is wheelchair accessible. Similar to Nivelette, unlike characters like Moiko or Skirk, you don't have to learn crazy combos. You can just hold down the button and you get your lasers with massive AoE and massive range. And you can even dodge with basically her whole kit. She's very user-friendly. Also, her range is very impressive. You can see how I just killed those birds from across the map. And not only that, her teammates also have impressive range as well. And I think this range in a Sandrone team will be very noticeable, even compared to other buffed superconduct DPSs like Wriothesley and Sino, because they are still ultimately melee characters. I also think she's very rotationally flexible. Her teammates just aren't really reliant on bursts. Yae Miko, Qiqi, Escoffier, characters like this, you can just swap in and out freely. Even Sandrone herself, maybe you want to swap to use Yae Miko's burst, you can reapply her skill as well. Qiqi's cooldowns are fixed. Even Nivelette needs to weave in his burst in order to get complete uptime on his charge attack. Sandrone will always have full uptime on her charge attack. Also, another thing very important, and you've probably noticed it already, maybe except for Escoffier if you're playing kind of freeze team, maybe also except for Nicole or Sucrose, but the majority of the superconduct supports you will be playing are basically completely uncontested. With Sandrone, you're able to form several variations of modern teams in the meta with teammates you're highly unlikely aren't already needing elsewhere, whether it's Diona, Qiqi, Yae Miko, Beidou. So with that being said, what's my pulling suggestions? Which players should pull? Who should skip? I would say if you're a story reader and not a story skipper, you probably want Sandrone. In all seriousness, new players, I would say a big recommendation for Sandrone. She's a DPS for the new meta. She's easy to play, good in exploration with both movement and being able to deal damage without needing elemental burst. She also has a variety of unpopular teammate options, which is especially important in 3-team content like Stygian Onslaught or Imaginary Theatre, where you need to be very flexible. I would say meta slaves, I think that goes without saying. You probably want to consider pulling. I would say Yae Miko mains, you probably want to consider pulling. And this patch in general is just an insane boost to your Yae Miko. You can immediately form a modern team that fully utilizes Yae Miko's strengths. But who should skip? Now I would say Risley and Sino dedicated mains should skip. And that's because I don't think you should jump the gun. Although you will be unable to fully utilize their new Stellar Conduct buffs without Sandrone, because like Luna, you need new characters to turn on Stellar Conduct. Think about it this way, even if you pulled Sandrone, you still won't be able to fully utilize Risley or Sino because you're playing them in a GIMP team with 2 DPSs. Therefore, I think those guys should skip because it's highly likely we'll get an actual new Stellar Conduct sub DPS or support that can also activate these buffs for your, whether that's the Traveler or a random 4-star or a 5-star, I don't know. Lastly, very important topic, what is the ideal pulling location? I would say you have a few options. If you've been following the animated short recently, you could pull in Alen's grave, which is just over there, which is this part of Fontaine. It overlooks the mountain there. I'm not sure if wishing works here, but you could also pull in Konabina's chill spot, which is obviously here on the map. And lastly, could also be a good idea to pull in Marianne's house, the Rio Anaposis in Fontaine. So with that being said, that's it for the video. Let me know if you found it helpful, or if you have more questions, feel free to leave it in a comment below and I'll try to get back to all of you guys. Good luck on your pulls and thanks for watching.